The Moscow murders shocked the world. But what if key evidence was sitting right in front of investigators from day one, and they missed it? This is the story of the evidence that slipped through the cracks, the whispers in the data that were drowned out by the roar of the investigation, and the haunting possibility that the path to the truth was visible long before an arrest was ever made. We begin in the early hours of a cold November morning in 2022, in the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho. A call is placed to 911 from inside a house on King Road. The voices are frantic, confused. They report an unconscious person. But when police arrived, they don't find one unconscious person. They find four: Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Gongalves. All four brutally murdered. The scene is one of almost unimaginable violence. The community is paralyzed with fear. A killer is on the loose, and a clock starts ticking. The golden hours for solving a crime evaporating fast. Act 1. The rush for answers. In the immediate aftermath, the Moscow Police Department, aided by state police and the FBI, launches one of the largest investigations in Idaho's history. The public is desperate for information, for a suspect, for safety. The narrative that begins to form is one of a targeted, isolated attack. Police assure the community there is no ongoing threat. The focus narrows. Tips flood in by the thousands. Digital forensics teams scour the victims' phones, their social media, their final movements. A white Hyundai Elantra is seen on neighborhood cameras, and its driver becomes the subject of an international manhunt. The world watches, waiting for a break. And then it comes. Over a month later, a suspect is in custody: Brian Koberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student from a nearby university. The arrest is based on a trail of DNA, cell phone pings, and the sighting of that white Elantra. The case, it seems, is solved. The community breathes a sigh of relief. But beneath the surface of this seemingly tidy resolution, a different story was trying to be told. A story written in evidence that didn't fit the emerging narrative, in anomalies that were perhaps too quickly explained away. This is where our investigation begins, at the point where the official story locked into place, and other possibilities were quietly filed away. Act 2. The ghosts in the machine. To understand what might have been missed, we must first look at what was found, and more importantly, what wasn't. The official affidavit paints a picture of a meticulous, if not flawless, investigation, leading straight to Koberger. But let's rewind. In the first 48 hours, before the Elantra was a focal point, before DNA results had come back, the crime scene itself was speaking, and it was saying contradictory things. There were reports from sources close to the investigation of unexplained latent footprints, not the bloody ones, but faint impressions in areas away from the primary crime scenes. These were not pursued as aggressively once a single suspect theory took hold. Then there is the digital ghost, the surviving roommates. Their phones, according to leaked information from investigators, showed a flurry of activity in the hours before the 911 call was made, activity that didn't align with the timeline of a deep sleep followed by a sudden, horrifying discovery. There were repeated calls and texts to friends, not to the victims. Why? What did they hear or see that prompted this activity? The official statement says they slept through it and woke up confused, but the digital breadcrumbs suggest a state of prolonged, awake anxiety. This wasn't evidence of guilt, but it was evidence of a different experience that night, an experience that could have provided critical context about the timeline, the presence of others, or the killer's actions. The most compelling ignored evidence, however, may lie in the patterns that existed before that night. Moscow, Idaho was not a high crime area, but it was not a vacuum. In the months leading up to the murders, there was a noticeable spike in peeping Tom incidents, home invasions, and aggressive harassment targeting young women in the off-campus housing areas near King Road. These were often reported to campus security and local police, treated as isolated, low-level nuisances. But viewed through the lens of what happened on November 13th, they form a chilling mosaic of predation. Was the killer practicing? Was he casing locations, testing boundaries, and building confidence? The police, in their urgent focus on the singular, horrific event, may have failed to connect these dots as part of a behavioral continuum. They were looking for a murderer, when they should have also been looking for the voyeur, the burglar, the harasser he almost certainly was before he became a killer. This is a classic investigative blind spot, treating the catastrophic event as an island, disconnected from the sea of smaller crimes that lapped at its shores. And then there is the evidence that simply vanished, or rather, the lack of evidence where there should have been an abundance. The murder weapon was never found. The suspect's apartment and car, when finally searched, yielded no direct conclusive trophies or blood evidence linking him to the victims, despite the incredibly violent nature of the crimes. The single source of DNA tying Kohberger to the scene was found on a knife sheath button, a small, transferable object. Proponents of the investigation call this a smoking gun. Skeptics call it curiously convenient and ask, where is the rest? Where are the clothes, the shoes, the murder weapon soaked in evidence? The lack of a complete forensic trail suggests either an almost supernatural level of cleanup by the suspect or the possibility that the evidence trail was always more complicated than it seemed. Furthermore, the timeline established by cell phone pings is frustratingly broad. It places Kohberger's phone in the area, but it does not and cannot place him inside that house at the exact moment of the murders. This creates a window of possibility that other actors or other explanations could theoretically fit into. The investigation, by necessity, filled that window with the most direct suspect. But did they stop looking through other windows? Act 3. The unanswered echo. So where does this leave us? The confrontation is not with a killer, but with the investigation itself. The climax of this story is the trial, still pending, where all this evidence, both the pursued and the potentially ignored, will be tested in the harsh light of a courtroom. The resolution we have now is not one of truth, but of narrative. The state has a narrative, a lone, obsessed individual who left a trail of digital and biological evidence. The defense will have a counter-narrative, one of sloppy police work, confirmation bias, and ignored evidence that points to other possibilities. The true emotional peak of this saga may be the realization that in high-profile, high-pressure cases, the drive for closure can sometimes outpace the pursuit of complexity. The Moscow Police Department was under an unimaginable microscope, tasked with solving an atrocity while calming a terrified public. In that environment, anomalies are a threat to stability. Loose ends are a problem to be managed. The simplest, most direct path to an arrest becomes the most attractive. This does not mean the wrong man is in custody. It means the full story of that night may be richer, darker, and more tangled than any one arrest can contain. The evidence that was potentially ignored, the prior pattern of predation, the digital anxiety of the survivors, the unexplained physical traces, these aren't just footnotes, they are echoes. Echoes of the killer's journey to that house, echoes of the terror that lingered in it long after he left, and echoes of the investigative paths that grew cold as all resources funneled toward a single name. The central conflict, therefore, remains unresolved. It is the conflict between a justice system that requires a definitive answer and a crime that may resist a simple one. The haunting question is no longer just who did this, but what did we choose not to see in our desperation to see an answer? The final, powerful truth of the Moscow murders may be this. Sometimes, the most critical evidence isn't the piece that solves the puzzle, but the piece that reveals the puzzle itself is far larger and more frightening than anyone wanted to believe.